My cousin was just murdered by a Minneapolis police officer. His name is George Terry Floyd.
A familiar name is representing the family. Renowned civil rights attorney Ben Crump.
America is a capitalistic society. The one thing that America understands is money. If you can make them pay higher values, they will start killing black people. It would be an impediment. Mama, we out here on John's farm because we fighting for the black farmers. Were you taught how to use the products from Monsanto?
No.
People seek me out because they want somebody they feel they can trust. It's not just fighting racism and discrimination in these police shooting cases. It's fighting racism and discrimination wherever it rears its ugly head. You gotta try to not just be a spectator on the sideline. Get into the arena and do something. I have been given influence for a reason, and shame on me if I don't use that influence. I know who I am, and I know whose I am. Always argue what is right. Thank you. I'm so very honored to be here, to be with you, Rochester, New York, on this Martin Luther King celebration weekend. And I know it's a lot going on in the world. I flew in from Los Angeles, where we're representing people who were killed in the Altamira, the black community of LA County. And we're fighting to make sure that the black community isn't swept under the rug while they talk about the more affluent communities of Palisades. Because, as Dr. King said, we all have a role to play in this struggle for equality and justice. Everybody got a role to play. Dr. Miller got a role to play. Reverend Harvey got a role to play. The brother who stood up got a role to play. The Omegas got a role to play. The school teachers got a role to play. And the citizens of our community, we all have a role to play to make sure that we can get equality and justice for all of our communities. So, before I begin to make my arguments to you today, I want to take a point of personal privilege just to recognize a few special individuals. And I know Dr. Miller got me on the time clock, so I don't want to be held in contempt, so I'm gonna make a concise argument, Dr. Miller. I first want to recognize my investigator / security guard, Arthur Reed, who did not think it robbery for us to get up at 5 in the morning. We left Los Angeles, Houston, then was in Chicago speaking yesterday. And we got up at 5 in the morning to make sure we could get to O'Hare Airport because the traffic is crazy. And then we got on the tarmac in Chicago, and then the flight was delayed. But God got us here on time, so I want to thank God. And I want to thank Arthur Reed, also known as Silky Slim. Silky, raise your hand, man. Y'all give that brother a round of applause. He's always been there fighting in the community, fighting for us to make sure that our children have a better chance at life. His big thing is stopping black on black crime, and we thank you for that, Silky. Yeah. I would be remiss if I didn't come into this great cathedral that my fraternity brother, Reverend Harvey, has. I mean, this beautiful cathedral, and speak truth to power. So y'all give a great round of applause for the shepherd of this church, Reverend Harvey. And then, I'm so impressed with Dr. Paul Miller, a brother who just doesn't talk the talk, but he walks the walk. Thank you so much, Brother Miller, for making a difference in your community and convening this important conversation. Y'all give him a great round of applause. We can do better than that. No, brother, no, we appreciate him. I understand how hard it is when you fight at home to make a difference. So thank you, Brother Miller. Thank you. And certainly to my fellow lawyers and judges and members of the legal community, I would like all of you to stand and be recognized, because we're in this together, and even though they give certain ones of us attention, we're all in it together. So we're all the lawyers and the judges and legal professionals, please stand and be recognized. I'm standing on your shoulders, and I pray that you can stand on mine as well. And then finally, I have to recognize these individuals because they say all great men may not be members of Omega Psi Phi, but all members of Omega Psi Phi Fraternity Incorporated are great men. We're the brothers of Omega Psi Phi Fraternity. Please stand and be recognized. The greatest fraternity on planet Earth. And special recognition to our 39th Grand Basilisk, Dr. Andrew Ray from Rochester, New York. Thank you very much, Dr. Ray. So I done killed about 5 minutes of my time. I got 20 minutes. I got it, Dr. Miller. I got it. So if it may please this court, I stand here to make the argument in 20 minutes that if we follow the Martin Luther King legal advice, that we can give our children equal opportunity at achieving the American dream. If we follow the Martin Luther King legal advice, we can give all of our children here in Rochester and our children all across America, an equal opportunity at achieving the American promise of life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness. You see, brothers and sisters, it's not enough for our children just to have a right to life and be free from being killed as a result of excessive force and police brutality by the very people who are supposed to protect and serve them. Yeah, it's not enough just to say my child didn't become the next George Floyd or the next Robert Brooks or the next Breonna Taylor. That's not enough, black people. That's not enough. It is not enough for our children to have a right to liberty, to where they're not imprisoned for some trumped up felony conviction, and I do mean trumped up felony conviction or wrongful prosecution. Brothers and sisters, our children also deserve the right to the pursuit of happiness. And that's what Dr. Miller is fighting for in Rochester, in the community. So all of our children will have a right to the pursuit of happiness, that they'll have a right to have an education, that they have a right to be able to have a sustainable job that can give them a living wage, Brother Jeffries, and that they can have a right to have a home, and that can have warm water and food on the table, and be able to pass on generational wealth to our black children for the next generation. That's what we're fighting for. That's why education is so important. It is the great equalizer. And so I applaud you, Dr. Miller, what you're fighting for in Rochester. And that's why if we make sure we follow Martin Luther King's legal advice, we can make sure all of our children, black, white, brown, all of our children can have an equal opportunity at this American promise. What is Martin Luther King's legal advice, you ask? Well, brothers and sisters, the legal advice that Martin Luther King shared with the world came from his letter from the Birmingham jail, which I submit to you is one of the most profound essays ever written in the course of human history. And you have to remember the context of which Dr. King wrote that letter. He was down in Birmingham, Alabama, fighting for black people to have the right to vote. And because he did that, they put him in jail. And I know we have a revisionist history in America today, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But you know, now Dr. King is celebrated and loved and exalted by everybody. Everybody loved Dr. King. Everybody marched with Dr. King. Everybody celebrated Dr. King. But when Dr. King was marching, fighting for black people to have equal rights, he was one of the most hated people in the country. I mean, they didn't want King coming to their city. They didn't want King coming to Rochester. They didn't want Martin Luther King coming to Chicago. They didn't want him coming to Los Angeles. They didn't want him coming to Birmingham. But thank God him and young people like John Lewis and the activists came anyway. You see, when Dr. King was sitting in the jail, his attorney, Fred Gray, another great Omega man, came to the jail and he slipped him a copy of the Birmingham newspaper. And on the front page was an op-ed from the Ministerial Alliance, the other ministers, the other preachers, the white preachers in Birmingham who wrote a letter saying Martin Luther King should just get out of town. He should not have come to Birmingham, that he was just an outside agitator. He was a race baiter. He was a troublemaker. And they wanted him to go back where he came from. I mean, Dr. Ray, they called him everything but a child of God. These are his fellow ministers. And so the New York Times asked if Dr. King could give a response. And Fred Gray gave him the newspaper and snuck him one sheet of his legal pad. And Dr. King read the letter, and then he started writing. And he wrote on the front page of the letter, the paper, he wrote on the back. He then wrote on the margins of the newspaper to share his thoughts. And what he gave to the world was something so profound. I mean, it was riveting what he said sitting in a jail cell and told the world. Now, most people think he was just talking to those preachers who were criticizing him. But I submit to you, brothers and sisters, he was talking to all of us. He was talking to all of us, and most people remember what he said when he said in the letter that a threat to justice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We all remember that. But I submit to you, what was more profound in that letter was what he said when they said, well, why do you feel an obligation that you, Martin Luther King, should be here in Birmingham, Alabama, fighting this battle? And what Dr. King said in that letter, he said, we as moral people have a moral obligation to oppose injustice when we see it. He said, you can't call yourself a good person when you see injustice. You just look the other way and say it's not affecting me and my family. He said, you can't call yourself a good person when you see evil and you just look the other way and keep having your dinner. No, Dr. King said, when you see evil, when you see injustice, if you're a good person, you have an obligation to do something. You have to stand up. You have to say something. You have to be heard. And so he said, I have an obligation to oppose the unjust laws. And he went on to say, so I can break it down and make it simple for you all, Rochester. He said that just because they tell us it's legal, he said that doesn't make it right. Dr. King said in the letter from the Birmingham jail, we must remember that everything Hitler did to the Jews in Germany, they said was legal. But he said that didn't make it right. He said, brothers and sisters, we must remember that they said slavery was legal. But he said that didn't make it right. He said, brothers and sisters, we must remember that they said segregation was legal. But he said that didn't make it right. He said we must remember everything they did to that little boy named Emmett Till in Money, Mississippi. They tried to tell us that it was legal. But we must all in unison say, but that don't make it right. And I tell you, brothers and sisters, they will try to tell us everything they did to Breonna Taylor in Louisville, Kentucky was legal. And we all have to say what they did to that black queen was not legal. And when they tell us that, that doesn't make it right. They're going to try to tell us what they did to Tyree Nichols, who was beat to death in Memphis, Tennessee, was legal. But we all have to stand up and say, but that doesn't make it right. And they're going to tell you all in Rochester, New York, what they did to Robert Brooks was legal. But you all have to stand up and say, but that don't make it right. You see, brothers and sisters, they are going to always try to engage in the intellectual justification of discrimination. We're seeing it happen all across America right now. I mean, this attack on everything that made progress for black people in America. They're attacking DEI, they're attacking black literature, they're attacking black history. I mean, Dr. Miller, I never thought in 2025 that we would be arguing whether diversity was a good thing or not. You couldn't convince me of that. I wouldn't have believed it, Reverend Harvey. In our day, we thought we had all fought that war a long time ago and we won that war. But we are fighting whether diversity is a good thing or not. And it's just sad, man, because it's so elementary. We know that the more people you have at the table from different and diverse backgrounds, the better outcomes we will get. My 12-year-old little daughter, she understands that. Her name is Brooklyn. She understands that 2 heads are better than 1, 4 heads better than 2, 8 better than 4, so on and so forth. We need everybody to have a seat at the table. And that way we can make America be where she ought to be. It reminds me, Brother Jeffries, of what Reverend Jesse Jackson said once. He said that, before Jackie Robinson broke the color barrier and integrated Major League Baseball, that the argument was, well, we let blacks and Hispanics play Major League Baseball, then they would bring down the quality of the game. Well, Jesse Jackson said, the truth of the matter was, we didn't know how good baseball could be until we let everybody play the game. We got to let everybody play the game. We got to let the black children play the game. That's what it's about. That's what it's about. And it's all about them trying to erase history. They're trying to reinvent a narrative that was never the case. And we have to continue to stand up and hold their feet to the fire. Now more than ever, brothers and sisters, now more than ever, the teachers, but we got to teach real history. We got to teach real history. Because what we must remember is those who don't intend on teaching history intend on repeating history. Y'all will get that when you're leaving. We got to make sure. You see, Carter G. Woodson, another great Omega man, the father of black history, said that if a race has no history, if a race has no values or traditions that are important enough to teach the younger generation and the children, then that race will become a negligible thought in the mind of the world and thus become endangered from being exterminated from the face of the earth. And so I say to the elected governor in the state of Florida and the elected governor in Texas and any other elected official anywhere in America who thinks that they can exterminate our black literature, exterminate our black history, exterminate our black culture, that they got another thing coming, because we are unapologetic defenders of black life, black liberty, and black humanity. And that there will be no American history if there was not black history. We got to teach all of our children that all of their culture and all of their history contributed to the greatness of America. The white children need to know just as much as the black children about black history. And the brown children need to know about our black history, and we need to know about Hispanic history. We all need to know what everybody contributed, because everybody contributed to making America this great nation. We all had a role to play in. And you can't erase any of our role out of it, despite how much they gonna try in the next 4 years. We can't let them do it, brothers and sisters. We can't let them do it. So as I make ready to try to conclude my arguments and not be held in contempt of court, I want to leave you with these 2 quick points. Ben Franklin said that democracy is like 2 wolves and a lamb voting on what to have for lunch. You ain't got to be as smart as Dr. Miller to know who's going to win that vote. But Dr. Ray, he said liberty is making sure that that lamb is well armed to protest that vote. So brothers and sisters, what we're trying to do, what Dr. Miller is trying to do, is make sure that we make sure our young lambs of color, our young marginalized lambs are well armed to protest being targeted for the school to prison pipeline. We're trying to make sure that our young lambs of color are well armed to be able to protest the prison industrial complex. We're trying to make sure that our young lambs of color are well armed to be able to protest voter suppression. We're trying to make sure that our young lambs of color are well armed to be able to protest environmental racism. We're trying to make sure that our young lambs of color are well armed to be able to protest denial of access to quality health care. We're trying to make sure that our young lambs of color are well armed to be able to protest denial of access to capital. Brothers and sisters, we are not trying to tell our young people, Silky Slim, to be well armed with guns and bullets or any measure of violence. That's not what we're saying. What we are saying to our young people is we want you to be well armed with intellect, with diplomacy, with strategic thinking. Because brothers and sisters, if you don't remember anything I said today, if you don't remember anything I said at this great Mount Olivet Baptist Church, I got it right? If you don't remember anything I said during this Martin Luther King weekend celebration initiated by Dr. Miller here in Rochester, New York on January 18th, 2025, I want you all to remember this, that the enemies of equality will not win this war in the struggle for equality and justice for all, as long as we make sure that our children are more intelligent than those who will seek to oppress them. As long as we make sure our children are educated and intellect, then the enemies of equality will not win. Our children will win. And that's why it is so important what Dr. Miller is doing. So, my final point, Dr. Miller, and then you can call the Sandman out. My personal hero is Thurgood Marshall. Thurgood Marshall said at the bicentennial celebration of the signing of the United States Constitution in 1976 that the basis of the United States Constitution is simply this. He said that a black baby born to a black mother, the most uneducated black mother, the most inarticulate black mother, the most impoverished black mother has the same exact rights as a white baby born to a white mother, the most educated white mother, the most articulate white mother, the most affluent white mother, just by virtue of that baby drawing his first breath as an American citizen. Now, Justice Marshall said, I know that's not the case in America today, but I challenge anybody to say that's not a goal worth fighting for. I challenge anybody to say that's not what makes America the great beacon of hope and justice for all the world to marvel. So brothers and sisters, when we fight for justice for the George Floyds of the world, when we fight for justice for the Trayvon Martins of the world, when we fight for justice for the Breonna Taylors of the world, when we fight for justice for the Tyree Nichols of the world, when we fight for justice for the Ahmaud Arbery's of the world, when we fight for justice for the Oscar Grants of the world, when we fight for justice for the Michael Browns of the world, when we fight for justice for the Alton Sterlings of the world, when we fight for justice for the Alton Jeffersons of the world, when we fight for justice for the Robert Brooks of the world. And when we fight for justice, well, when we fight for justice, for what my grandmother would often say using the biblical reference, when we fight for justice for the least of these, then we have America live up to its creed. We have America be the great beacon of hope and justice for all the world to marvel. But what we really do, brothers and sisters, when we fight for justice for the least of these, we help America be America for all Americans. And we give all of our children an equal opportunity at the American dream. We give all of our children an equal opportunity at the American promise of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We can do it, brothers and sisters. We have to be willing to stand up for our children's future. We have to be willing to speak up for our children's future. And we have to be willing to fight for our children's future. And Reverend Harvey, I know I'm in church, but we gotta be willing to fight for our children's future. Our children can never ask the question of us. My daughter can never ask me the question, Daddy, do you really mean it when you say Black Lives Matter? No. I don't want my children, none of our children have to ask that question ever. Because I want them to see in what we do, not what we say, that we believe in their future so much that we're willing to do anything for them, even if that means to die for them, to make sure that they have a future where they can experience the American dream too. And we have to be willing to fight for our children's future, Rev. until hell freezes over. And then we better be ready to fight on the ice. Thank you. I rest my case. God bless.